أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Program Director, CEO and founder of Ashraful Aid, Mr. Hilaal Wadi, founder and executive director of Akuwat Foundation, social entrepreneur and philanthropist, Dr. Mogamad Amjad Saqib, CEO of Action for Humanity UK, Dr. Usman Mubal, former MEC of Finance in the Free State Province, Mrs. Khadija Brown, if she's here, Secretary General of Kenya Red Cross Society, Dr. Ahmed Idris, CEO of National Zakah Fund of Australia, Mr. Ismail Davids, Executive Director, Mr. Firaz Aziz of Humanity, IHA Humanitarian Relief Foundation, Mr. Yavuz Sufi, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start by thanking the founder and CEO of Ashraful Aid, Mr. Hilaal Wadi, for hosting this important meeting, the International Humanitarian Summit, and for the kind invitation and opportunity afforded me to deliver this keynote address. It is an honor for me to stand before you and speak to the courageous women and men who have distinguished themselves by their uncompromising commitment to build a better and a humane world, even in the face of the current crisis, when humanitarian organizations have been deliberately targeted in clear violation of international humanitarian law. As you are aware, the summit takes place in the midst of an unimaginable humanitarian crisis unfolding before our very own eyes in Gaza, Palestine. This month marks the first anniversary of an all-out war that has turned Palestinian homes into cemeteries and ruins. Al-Jama'ah, as a political party, was one of the last parties to join the government of national unity after we've been approached by six structures of the African National Congress. And I got a phone call from President Ramaphosa, who was very much in a hurry, and told us that he wants to offer myself the position of deputy. So I told him I accept the position of deputy president. And he said, no, not deputy president. He said deputy minister of social development. And then I was thinking that if I was the president and I had to match political parties outside the ANC with certain portfolios, it would be a very difficult task. So they must have done their research on me. And if they did a proper research, then I would have been Minister of Labour, because I was one of the top guns in labour relations, being a director of Nestle, Naspers, all the big companies for 40 years in the corporate world. But he chose social development. And maybe he knew my wife was a social worker and that she groomed me for the post, 49 years married to a social worker. Without you knowing, you are being groomed. But I don't think that was the reason. The reason was that he knows that Al-Jama'ah is a Muslim political party. And he wanted to have the support of the Muslim community to address the a very important matter, and that is to eradicate poverty in terms of the National Development Plan Vision 2030. And they must have thought, and they also have the ANC as a brother bond. Mr. Tango will agree with me they have a broederbond. And you know what a broederbond is? Like a Stellenbosch mafia. They also have one. So they must have advised the president, who to give what position. So the community or the constituency that would best eradicate poverty, they must have come to the conclusion must be the Muslim community. So this appointment is not me. It's appointing the Muslim community to address poverty eradication. So the challenge now is that we have got 6 years left, and we are 30 years into our democracy. A lot of time has been wasted, and the clock is ticking. So South Africa, in the National Development Plan, one of the goals is to eradicate poverty by 2030. So I went a bit deeper into it, and they are referring to food poverty. And the figure that was established was 760 rand. So that means that everyone in South Africa should have 760 rand in their pocket every month. So the NGO, NPO sector and the foundations like Ashraful Aid and others, they need to partner with government, and I heard about partnership, to help us eradicate poverty by 2030. So I did the numbers, and it means that will cost 75 billion rand, which is not a lot of money. So it is not a pipe dream. We can eradicate food poverty by 2030. So I just want to make an appeal to the organizations here to partner with government to achieve that. So we have all these organizations doing excellent work, but we don't see them making a dent or a difference to poverty. We don't see them making a dent with regard to HIV/AIDS. They are just plastering the cracks. I'm not saying that all these organizations, the Muslim organizations especially, have not made a contribution. They made a fantastic contribution, because even if they didn't make that contribution, things would have been worse. But there's been no incremental improvement. And that is very sad. And the reason is that they are not partnering effectively with government. They're all working in silos. So all the zakah money, all the lila, all these things are not making a dent in eradicating poverty and the social ills in society. I know the emphasis is on Africa, and I just want to highlight two important matters, and that there is not a single country in Africa that has uhuru. They may have independence, but and the reason is that 50% of the GDP of every African country is lost through illicit financial flows. Just imagine if that 50% is part of the fiscus. That money, for example, my Department of Social Development, they can use that money to address all the needs that we have to alleviate poverty. So we need to also have a parallel process to address the illicit financial flows that goes to Mauritius, and now it's going to Singapore. It's now a favorite country because they don't have any extradition agreements with any other country. So those of you who want to launder money and want to steal the money of the poor, I'm giving you a tip: go to Singapore. That is now a big problem. The other thing is that the intercontinental African trade is going to result in 7 years of prosperity for Africa. And that needs to be speeded up. And that's why some of us are working on the hydrogen train to run from Algeria to Cape Town. Not Cairo to Cape Town, but Algeria to Cape Town, because if you start with Cairo, you leave out the part of Africa. So if we look at Africa, we've got to put it in context. Illicit financial flows, that is making us lose a lot of money. And secondly, we need to look at the opportunities of the intercontinental African trade, where the borders will be opened and there will be free trade. And that is not going to be easy, because a lot of countries will lose revenues, so there needs to be programs in place for that. So we find that, I mentioned earlier on that NGOs and NPOs work in silos. They should work with the National Development Agency, and I know that they have been very slow, but I have signed off their new policy of sustainable livelihoods for the poorest of the poor, and they've got some wonderful programs in the policy that now needs to roll out. So we heard about giving the person a fishing rod instead of giving him fish. And so I would like to invite NPOs and NGOs to engage with my department so that they can understand the policy and partner with government, because a lot of work has been done. I am pleased to announce that we have finally signed off the policy on social development. South Africa had a policy on social welfare, and we've now developed a new policy on social development, and it will now go to Cabinet, and it will then roll out. And this policy on social development is amazing. It must be the best policy, ever developed over the 30 years of our democracy in South Africa. And we're now seeing the fruits of it. I'm amazed at, they started with pre-birth. And it goes, the policy cares for everyone until you are buried. I would like to invite NPOs to serve as focus groups to guide the department further on this policy. Out of this policy will be a family policy. Just imagine 30 years into democracy, South Africa doesn't have a family policy. So the family policy will also come out of that. So NPOs and NGOs and foundations, when it comes to South Africa, you just have to align yourself with the policy document on social development once it's approved in Parliament and by the Cabinet. Otherwise, you're working in silos, and that is going to be a very serious challenge. I want to also explain that the government of national unity is very stable. They have now created what they call a clearinghouse. So issues of dispute is going to be delegated to the chief of staffs of political parties and their team leaders. And there are a lot of efforts to strengthen the relationship of the 10 political heads of the 10 parties forming the government of national unity. So I want to I want to state that these policies I'm talking about has the support of the political parties in the government of national unity, and I'm going out of my way to also get the support of all political parties represented in Parliament. So with regard to Palestine, which I referred to earlier on, we call on the justice-loving international community to intervene and enact an arms embargo and sanctions to end the occupation. We further support a call from the Support Defense for Children International Palestine, a Palestinian human rights organization in the West Bank, for the immediate implementation and comprehensive arms embargo, as well as diplomatic and financial pressure to stop the genocide of Palestinians. That the rights of Palestinian children, rights as outlined in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, be respected. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this summit must strongly condemn this dangerous and blatant disregard for the international law and international humanitarian law, including the Geneva Convention. We take this opportunity to urge the global humanitarian community to demand that Israel urgently cease its attacks on humanitarian organizations in Gaza. Whilst we are highlighting the plight and suffering of nations under occupation and war, the South African government does not lose focus on local challenges. As Deputy Minister of Social Development, I've been tasked with various delegations and delegated the following programs: HIV and AIDS, and I think that is a humanitarian crisis. Also, substance abuse, families and parenting, older persons, and services to persons with disabilities. I want to move on to the question whether HIV is still a humanitarian crisis. The simple answer is yes. However, the picture differs from country to country and among regions, and I was very interested to hear what the CEO of Ashraful had to say about his passion to do something about HIV/AIDS. In developing countries, there are still significant gaps in HIV management, and with Agenda 2030 being just 6 years away, all countries should scale calls on the global community to end AIDS and eliminate HIV as a public health threat. To date, the global community has claimed 43 million lives globally, and in 2023, someone dies of AIDS every minute. In South Africa, there are 8 million people living with HIV, but only 6 million of them are on sustained treatment. That leaves us with a treatment gap of 2 million people who are infected but not on life-saving antiretroviral therapy. Not being on treatment means the cycle of infection continues, thereby compromising our ability to meet the SDG target 3.3. Adolescent girls and young women are hardest hit by the virus in South Africa. We record 1,300 new infections per week, just within the same cohort alone. Globally, 53% of all people living with HIV are women and girls. To turn the tide against HIV, we must invest in interventions targeting social and structural drivers of the epidemic, as well as social and behavior change communication. We must also invest in community-led monitoring for accurate data in order to design interventions that are geospecific, nuanced, and targeted. We should also invest in interventions targeting priority groups like people in prisons and people who use drugs. So I want this summit to try and also advise us on the way forward to address the issue of HIV and AIDS. It is an international humanitarian problem, and I would imagine, especially in Africa, it is a big challenge. So to conclude and to summarize, Mr. Chairman, I've raised the issue of eradicating poverty by 2030. I know this is an international summit, but charity begins at home. So we should, the summit should come up with programs of action to help government in South Africa to eradicate poverty by 2030. But because this is an international summit and there is a bit of biasness towards Africa, the summit should also come up with ideas on how can we ensure that every person living in the continent of Africa will have 760 rand in their pocket every month in order to meet the goal of food security. Now, 760 rand may not be a big figure, but one had to take into account the economy, the conditions. It is a standard for Africa. I have suggested that we should rather move to 1,000 rand instead of 760 rand. But that is still under consideration, and we will be addressing the cabinet on that. So poverty eradication is very important. And secondly, I've just given you some figures on HIV and AIDS. And the summit should also do something about it. And thirdly, I also spoke about the plight of children in Palestine. It cannot be that this summit ignores the plight of children, especially in Palestine, and even the plight of children in Ukraine, children who are being kidnapped. So those are the three important issues that I would like to appeal to the delegates at this convention, and we hope that we will get the wisdom of Solomon from our international speakers. So this summit comes out very strongly with a program of action that will eradicate poverty, especially in South Africa, by 2030, that there will be more interest by local organizations in South Africa to be more active with HIV and AIDS. And also that we don't forget the rights of children and make sure that what is happening in Gaza won't happen to the children in South Africa and the children in Africa, as the agenda of the West is to depopulate the world. And we know all about that. The real challenges that we face today is that we need a new civilization. We were hoping that the UN Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, will create a civilized world. And a civilized world, the very people that are leading the so-called civilized world, are those who are breaking the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is now in tatters. So the present civilization, if we judge the actions of the West, and those of us who have studied history, we are part of a civilization that is most probably one of the worst civilizations that Mother Earth has ever seen on its soil. And that is very sad. So the first steps to a new civilization is the international legal route which Cyril Ramaphosa has now embarked on. And we hope that that will bring about a reorganization of countries that will come up with a new civilization, because the present civilization has failed humanity. This is a humanitarian international conference. There is nothing humanitarian about those two, the Charter and the Universal Declaration of Rights, because it has failed. So maybe this conference must also come up with how do we create a new civilization. Shukran, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.